Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lisa Molosky, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the 9th annual Circles of Hope Luncheon, benefiting reMind. Today's luncheon has been led by our remarkable chairs, Mary Leslie and Craig Plumhoff, and Mary Kristen and David Valentine. Please join me in thanking them for their gracious support and leadership in planning this virtual luncheon, which, as you can imagine, had many moving parts. And the person who has been leading the charge for reMind throughout the past few months of unbelievable change in our city and the world is reMind Executive Director Jennifer Leal. Jennifer has been working tirelessly to make sure reMind's services are available to those in need. Jennifer?
Thank you, Lisa. And I want to personally thank each of you for joining us in this unique setting today, and hope this finds each of you safe and healthy. Local mental health experts believe the psychological impact of this pandemic could be greater than Hurricane Harvey and the 2008 recession combined. It goes without saying that COVID-19 has presented great challenges to our in-person support groups, but I am proud that reMind and our remarkable team has quickly shifted focus to online support groups and online mental health awareness to help the people of Houston. It costs approximately $20,000 to fund an online support group, and it is through your financial contribution that we keep these online groups free and accessible to everyone who needs them. So I would now like to introduce you to Ronnie Cunod, our 2020 board chair. Thank you so much, Ronnie, for being with us today and for sharing your story.
Thank you, Jennifer. I hope those of you watching today are as proud of our nimble and innovative reMind leadership and staff as I am during these challenging times, as they continue serving the Houston community with online support groups. I'm personally moved by reMind's mental health work in schools, our youth community, and suicide prevention, as I've seen the tragic impacts of mental health suffering. My son Grayson took his life 13 years ago on his first day of high school, just a couple of weeks shy of his 15th birthday. His death was out of left field, viciously devastating to our family, and our grief trail has been long and steep. No one wants to be a member of the club we're in. However, we have found healing by sharing our story and supporting organizations like reMind on the front lines of suicide prevention with children, teens, and adults. Your continued support of reMind always means a lot, but particularly so with COVID-19, which has compounded many mental health challenges, including depression and bipolar disorders. reMind's mission is to provide some peace on a tough trail, and that's rewarding, especially when we're ascending the hills together.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with all of us today, Ronnie. The memory of your son lives on in the way you advocate for mental health. And Ronnie, I know your son Grayson was a lacrosse player, so your connection to our honorees runs deep.
Yes, Lisa, Grayson was a lacrosse player, and I've known our honorees for a long time. Katie and David Lentner and Mary Zimmerman are the founders of the Sevens for Sevens Drew Webb lacrosse tournament. reMind has been honored to receive the proceeds from that lacrosse tournament for the past 10 years, which enables us to continue our work in mental health and suicide prevention. The exposure this tournament has provided reMind in suicide awareness has been crucial to the youth who participate every year, reminding them that mental health issues are very real and should be taken seriously. This tournament has also helped keep alive the memory of Drew Webb. I am honored to award Katie and David Lentner and Mary Zimmerman the Gary Levering Mental Health Impact Award this year, the highest honor reMind can give in our area of mental health work. Katie and David and Mary, thank you for everything you do.
Thank you, Ronnie. I'm David, this is my wife Katie, and our great friend Mary Zimmerman, and we'd like to thank reMind for this honor. Receiving the Gary Levering Mental Health Impact Award means a lot to all of us. We knew Drew personally. He coached 2 of our sons in lacrosse and was also a founding coach for the Houston Hurricanes lacrosse team. He was a remarkable young man who was also an amazing lacrosse player, mentor, and coach. He died by suicide in 2010, And after his funeral, we shared with Drew's parents, Dorothy and Hall Webb, that the lacrosse community wanted to coordinate a tournament to celebrate Drew and raise donations for the charity of their choice. Dorothy and Hall appreciated the idea and chose reMind Depression and Bipolar Support. The tournament was named Sevens for Seven because Drew always wore jersey number 7, and the tournament uses smaller fields with only 7 players instead of the usual 10. Over the years, we are thrilled that close to $300,000 has been raised for reMind, thanks to the lacrosse community and a small group of dedicated volunteers who support the work reMind does for depression and bipolar disorders. We look forward to continuing to carry on Drew's memory and supporting reMind for many years to come. Thank you for this honor, especially during a time when mental health is more important than ever.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David, Katie, and Mary, for your support of reMind. It's now my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Eric Hipple. Eric is a former NFL quarterback who spent his entire 10-year career with the Detroit Lions. To his fans, he was the star quarterback, a charismatic player, and devoted family man. Away from the field, however, Eric struggled with depression. He kept his personal struggle private until he tragically lost his 15-year-old son, Jeff, to suicide. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Eric Hipple. Eric, thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
Eric, since your son's death, you have devoted your life to breaking the stigma surrounding mental health issues. But long before that, you had your own brush with death. It was back in 1997.
It's a difficult time for me, and I'd made the transition out of football, and transitions are difficult. Loss of self, and what do I do next? And I've never faced that before. But I started a business, and it was actually doing really, really well. I was learning along the way, but the business struggled when I lost my carrier, and when that happened, I started kind of falling apart. Fell into this depression. Didn't feel good, wasn't going to work, wasn't getting up and things. I just felt like, And part of it was, is this it? Is this how life is going to be? And that little struggle. But so my wife was going to drive me to the airport because I had a business trip to take. And as we got closer and closer to the airport, just this dread started falling over me. I just felt like, I can't do this. And so I picked up a napkin and I wrote, I'm sorry, I love you, and I handed it to her, and I jumped out of the car. And we were going 75 miles an hour when I jumped out. Hit the pavement. I don't remember any of this, but what they told me afterwards, I hit the pavement, and I just tumbled, and the car swerved. I didn't get run over, but I was a bloody mess laying over on the side of the highway, and my wife was, frantic and in shock somewhat, like, what just happened? I woke up in the hospital, and I was all bandaged up. They'd already done surgery on me. And my parents had flown in from California. This was in Michigan. And they were sitting at the foot of my bed. And there's a psychiatrist and my wife that were in this room. And as I come to, start coming out of it, I'm listening to the psychiatrist talk to my parents and my wife on how they can put me in the inpatient ward and get a good evaluation and start treatment. And stigma is so tough that is not going to happen. Nope, there's nothing wrong with me. I am fine. And it was kind of comical because here I'm saying I'm fine, all bandaged up, there's nothing wrong with me. And I think even the psychiatrist said, you just jumped out of a car, And I said, yeah, but that's over now. I'm fine, that's over with. And so in my mind, I put it aside and just forget about it. And so the story never really came out that I jumped out of this car. It was, the story was I fell out of the car because that's what we told. That's what we told the press and the media. And from the outside, people didn't really see that because I presented myself and, always jovial and always happy and gregarious and let's go. They didn't ever see the dark side.
You struggled for a while.
I struggled, but, I just tried to just keep moving forward. And I thought, well, that was the answer to it. I'll just work hard and work forward, and not deal with it. Don't let it catch up to me again. And the trouble with that was, of course, that you don't learn anything. And I never really found out what was going on with me. Never had a treatment. I was just, that's how I'm going to deal with it. But I didn't learn anything. And that put me in a really tough position to when my son started going through his troubles.
It's tragic that you had to learn through your son's death how to get help. But was that the turning point for you?
Almost. Okay. What it really did was when I was standing in the morgue and looking at his body, and it wasn't pretty, but looking at him, this sense of, I can't live with this. There's no way. And I really thought about death then, but I know now that I can't take my life, because when I jumped out of that car, it was, I was doing everybody a favor. That's how you feel, right? Like a burden, and I'm dragging them down and I'm worthless. And so I'll just remove myself and they'll be better off without me. But I know it's not true now, because here I'm feeling this pain from his death, and I'm sure he felt the same way. Didn't want to be a burden. And so now I'm carrying that. So I thought the only way to get past through this stuff was just to self-medicate. And I had the tools for it, and alcohol became, probably the biggest thing, but I also could get, pain pills. I could also get, muscle relaxers and those things like that, so anything I get my hands on, really, just to be numb, because, I can't face this. It wasn't until I got picked up on a DUI and actually, had to face that issue. And so I actually, a few days in jail, decided I don't want this. And so I actually was invited to a Luncheon Learn. I was doing a charity function for a suicide prevention function, almost kind of like this, right? And somebody walked up and they gave me a card, and it was the head of psychiatry for University of Michigan, and they invited me to a Luncheon Learn. And thank God for outreach, right? Because I knew nothing about Luncheon Learns except for lunch. So I'm going to go have lunch, and this is kind of cool, and I meet these people. But when the doctors got up and started talking about the signs of depression, the brain illness, the chemical changes that goes on, and my jaw hit the ground, and I was actually upset. I was mad, because why don't I know this stuff? In fact, why do you know it and not telling anybody? And so I stuck around afterwards and just engaged and wanted more answers, because it gave me answers not only for what happened to Jeff and maybe what happened to me, but also went back and gave me the answers of what my mom went through when my dad would say she's not coming out of her room, she's having one of her spells. What happened to me when in college, when I missed a whole quarter because I couldn't really get out of bed, so my grades got to the point where I wasn't eligible, and so I had to scramble in summer school to get my grades back up to play. So here were some answers, and that somewhat changed my life as far as getting treatment, and then they hired me as an outreach person to go out and try and lift the stigma, so people will talk and will discuss this stuff and seek help when they need it.
It's a remarkable story, and you spent so much of your life in the spotlight. So for the Lions, you set up a peer-to-peer group, and that's a lot like what reMind does. Why are those support groups so important?
I am so happy with what reMind does, because the work that I put in place for our alumni is about transition, about going through, but who do you talk to? And so we have a group of people, 8 guys, players, that are trained to do outreach, to call our guys, right? And to lead it to them, and then that way we're connecting. And so peers can be anything. Happen to be, we're peers in football because we all have that shared experience of playing that game. And so we start off in that stuff. But peers can also be maybe a group of friends. It can be a group that you work with, so your peer group there. It can be somebody going through a similar circumstance, so maybe somebody in recovery, maybe somebody who's struggling with depression. Those are all peer groups. And the way to get to some of those answers, and where you feel free enough to talk about some of those things and get, to get down to it, and is in that peer setting, to where they get me. I'm not alone in this, and I get a chance to discuss this, and together maybe we have some collective, understanding of hey, I'm not alone. I can get through this because I got support going on here. But I'm also being facilitated with somebody that knows the way and can help us facilitate that direction.
Eric, it seems remarkable what you've done and how your life has changed. You're clearly as passionate about this as you were about football. Do you think the stigma is changing? Do you think that a player now, would be more willing to come forward, or just someone out in our community?
I do. I think somebody asked me not too long ago about the stigma. It seems like college kids don't have stigma nowadays. And I said, hey, in high schools, none of the kids have stigma about mental health. The problem is, what do they do about it? And so when you say, hey, just go get treatment, that's not the easiest thing to do. You've got insurance issues. You've also got deductibles. You also have, some people have no insurance. and just trying to find a therapist, it might take 3 months before you get an appointment. I mean, so those are the difficulty things. That's where the stigma is, that we don't have enough support out there. And so groups like, that reMind has, it fills a really important gap in that too, which means I can actually talk to somebody now, even though my appointment might be a couple months down the road, or if I had my appointment, before I go on my next one, I've got a chance to go discuss some of this stuff. And so I call it like mini triage, you know what I mean? So these little things that knock us off balance and stuff, might be normal, but we don't know that if we're suffering, right? And so why not talk to somebody that's part of your peer and get some of those answers? And yeah, I am passionate about it, yeah.
So Eric, as we wrap things up, how can communities help themselves, in your opinion?
Well, I think communities can just take one notch up on their understanding of what mental health is. And I'm going to give you a definition, one that I really like, okay, which has nothing to do with a diagnosis, okay? It is a sense of well-being on who you are. And I say that because I know people who do have a diagnosis, but they take really good care of themselves and they're really mentally healthy. They make good decisions. They also can be productive. They also can be part of their community, and they have some control over their life. But I also know people who don't have a diagnosis that aren't doing very well. And it's because they don't take care of themselves. And so to me, that's not very mentally healthy. And so I'd rather say it's a sense of well-being on who you are. And it's about upping our game a little bit on what that means and not quitting until you get that. And that means if we have support groups where people are learning about this and also how to share and how to talk about this stuff, they're upping their game. And that means they can go out to the community too and be able to share with somebody else. And I think by doing that, a community can actually raise their level of understanding and level of commitment to mental health and also their awareness.
Eric, final thoughts?
Yes, I'd like to reiterate how important it is to support groups like reMind. They offer free services. That's free support groups to those that need, or maybe those that can help. And I think that's a really important piece in the time like we're going through right now, this chaos and stuff that's going on and the unknown, which can be very, very stressful, is to have a place for them to go. And I commend reMind for doing that. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much.
On behalf of reMind, I want to thank each of you for joining us. Thanks to those who have been involved since the beginning with Gary Levering. Thanks to all our current and past board members. Thanks to those serving on our host committee. And thanks to all of you, our loyal supporters. The work reMind does for depression and bipolar disorders could not happen without your support. We thank you for watching our first virtual luncheon and for supporting reMind. We hope to see you literally in person next year at our 2021 Circles of Hope Luncheon. Thank you again for joining us.